Hello, my name is Roman Hashvili, and this is the DVD on center counter. Now, we have made it before, center counter DVD, theoretical overview, but this one is completely different. It was a while ago since I made DVD on center counter and brought some interesting variation, interesting analysis not previously published in modern theory. But this one is different because we are not going through whole opening. What we are doing, bringing you completely different view on the center counter. Some new, interesting, and very well hidden possibilities that have been previously missed by both sides. And also, I will see new ways to handle positions that are known as much better for white or big advantage for white. This is not exactly so every time. And I have great examples to go by. So remember, every opening that you analyze or you play, except for the openings that knowingly bad, has hidden possibilities. And if someone says, no, there are no hidden possibilities, that's not true. It's not always easy to get to them, to find them. But together with powerful engines such as Houdini and Ripka, we can find them. You have to feed them ideas. And after I fed them some interesting ideas, I came up with some tremendous discoveries. I was very much surprised myself. And I want to share them with you. That will bring you new view on the center counter, the variation that I suggest, and you may find yourself also hooked on it. So sit tight and watch this DVD, already mentioned. As you remember from the previous DVD, I was a second for Gata Kamsky in a match against Anand. Match was tied. I suggested to play center counter to Gata. He has never played it. So as I already mentioned, we cannot go through every variation and every possibility for white. So I want to focus on some main continuations. Well, but I cannot give you brand new analysis and new suggestions without refreshing what is before. And I introduced new ideas and new interesting analysis and interesting continuations, and he played. Well, game was against Anand, ED, knight f6, d4, knight takes d5, knight f3, bishop g4, bishop e2, knight c6, c4, knight b6, d5, bishop takes f3. In this position, I have had, prior to this game, several times, and I have to refresh it in your memory if you saw this DVD. I had it number of times, and I've had people taking on f3 with the bishop and with the pawn. Somehow, we had strong suspicion that if this happens, Anand would take with the pawn. Now, let me quickly go over this reasoning. Well, if bishop takes, then knight e5. Now you see the pawn on c4 is hanging. Bishop can go back and now taking c4 pawn obviously loses after queen a4 check, so white will have to go b3, and after c6 black has a good position. Well, this was all known, and this was played before. Bishop e2 was played, and c6 was played. Let me quickly remind you what can happen here. In the one game that I played, actually it's important game, was played against Grandmaster Roman. I have to show this game again because this game becomes essential to understand this opening. So after bishop e2, c6, and now white plays queen d4 because black is threatening to play knight takes c4. And after queen d4, attacking the knight, knight g6, knight c3, e5. This position already is very much playable for black. Although objectively white may be slightly better, I still prefer this position for black. And taking with a knight is not any better, of course, because knight takes d5. But now we have to be aware of bishop b5 check. We got to go queen d7 and then bishop d6 with a very comfortable position. Well, the game was c takes d, bishop d6, bishop b5 check, knight d7, castle on both sides, and now black is threatening f5. I won this game very quickly because white didn't play very well in this position. Queen f5 was played, then knight c5, and after knight c5, b4, knight a6, a3. Now black is rolling their center. First attacking the queen, and after queen h3, knight c7, attacking the bishop and the d5 pawn, and after bishop d3, f5. Now black, in a view of e4 continuation, black is going to have very, very strong position. And let me go quickly through the game. Bishop g5, e4, bishop c4, h6, bishop d2, knight g6, f3, e takes f, and now if white takes with a queen or rook, then knight e5, and queen f6 or queen h4, and the c4 bishop is hanging. White has certain difficulties in this position. So gf was taken, and this is not any better because game ended practically in 3 moves. Queen f6, threatening queen d4 check, and after queen f6, here is practically no defense. Knight e2, covering d4 square, and after knight d2, here I already have forced win after b5, attacking the bishop, and if bishop moves to b3, then unexpectedly queen b2 move ends the game, attacking to bishop. So bishop c3 was played, and after knight f4, white simply resigned because they are losing material. After bishop takes f6, knight takes h3, simply wins because black is winning a piece, taking on f6 and then on c4. White takes knight, then after queen takes c3, most of white's pieces are hanging and position is dead lost. So this position after c6, I strongly believe is good position for white. So that's why when I played my first game against Judith Polgar, she took with a pawn, and I am sure that Anand haven't missed any of it. And he saw the game. He probably saw what happened in the game, and nevertheless, white could have had slightly better position. What happened in this game, I went knight e5. This is in my game against Judith Polgar, and after f4, knight d7, and knight c3 would have given good position to white. Well, I would have went e6, although I'm not so sure if white has really big advantage. Well, however, b3 also may be slightly better for white, the way it happened in the game. And again, I'm not that sure black doesn't have sufficient counterplay. However, here is the big news. After d takes e, queen f6 move gives big advantage to black. I missed it. I missed it then, but I saw it afterwards. Not that long ago, I had this exact position against some strong player, and I ended up winning this right after the opening. Pawn takes knight, knight takes, and now the rook is hanging. Black is getting their material back. So knight c3 was played. In order for queen takes c3, play bishop d2, but even then, black has great position here. But bishop b4 is a better move, even. And after rook b1, bishop takes c3, king f1, and simply castling. White, in my opinion, is completely busted. Material is even. Black has big advantage in development, better placed pieces, and white's pawn structure is absolutely terrible. So that's what could have happened even in my game with the Polgar. It was never mentioned, never analyzed. However, it happened not too long ago when I played game on the internet. I don't know what Anand had in mind, but I am pretty sure that he analyzed this game. In game against Kamsky after knight d7, continuation was knight c3, e6 supposed to be played by black. Kamsky supposed to play e6, and I mentioned it to him. However, he misstepped. He played c6, and after dc, bc, bishop e3, and e6. This position happened in Kamsky Anand. Queen d4 would have given white some advantage. And that's why I wouldn't recommend to play like this. So, where's the mistake? Mistake is c6. It's a clear mistake, and e6 should have been played. We already mentioned on b3 e6, but the same e6 move should be played even after knight c3. And black has absolutely great position after d takes e, f takes e. Well, great position. When you have complete equality after the opening, this is great. And the so position is great, and the outcome is fairly good. There are two novelties. Novelty that after f4, knight d7, if b3 played, e6, de, queen f6. This is absolutely critical upgrade for black in this position. Now, let's forget this variation, and let's go to the variation that books give clear advantage to white. And when I played center counter
and I played it a lot. This was most feared continuation for me. H3, bishop H5, G4, bishop G6, knight E5. It's a dangerous continuation, but it's dangerous not in a way that black can get crushed. No. This continuation is dangerous in a view of getting very passive positions. Let me tell you what I was getting. Knight D7, now knight takes G6, pawn takes G6, bishop G2, knight is hanging, C6, and after C4, I didn't feel like putting knight on B6 where it has absolutely no future, and I was going knight F6, and after knight C3, I repeatedly was getting very passive position with terrible knight on H5. I tried to improve several times, but still this continuation remained in my mind as the most unpleasant, and I always was breathing with relief when white was choosing some different continuations. This has changed, and here how it's changed. You're going to see now some weirdest pawn structures and some very, very intense dynamic duel. The correct move in this position, and the only correct move in this position, is knight c6. And right now, white has to take one of the pieces. Knight takes g6 or knight takes c6. And in both cases, black is going to have doubled pawn, and they will have very dynamic piece play. Let's go through this. Let's start with knight takes g6. This is very harmless continuation because I've had several games and every time I got very good position. H takes g, bishop g2, e6. White should castle here. And now queen f6 is the only way to play this position. Well, you're normally reluctant to make moves like this because queen is stepping in the game too early, and potential of white bringing knight on e4 is very real. Meanwhile, knight f4 doesn't really create much threat. White can always take. But after queen f6, white is facing immediate problem. Well, let's see what can white do. If c4, after knight f4, now they have more problems than they can chew. So right now, black is threatening knight takes h3. I don't know, whatever white plays. After black castles long, d4 pawn is terrible weakness. Something like d5 can be met with bishop d6, and after rook e1, maybe knight d4. You have here very reasonable position. This was my first thought, and after c5, I think black is a little better. Then, after careful examination, that's where powerful engines come very handy. You will see that move like d5 can get immediately crushing solution. Rook takes h3. Everything that happens from now on is forced. rook has to be taken because rook e1 is not really a playable option. It looks absolutely awful for white, and it is awful. Actually, if you have any engine, even Fritz or Ripka or any other hierarchs, you can put it on it, and they are all equally good in this type of position. There is a blow after blow, game ends in like a couple of moves. So, and if let's go quickly with the bishop takes h3 variation. Then we go bishop d6, threatening mate, and black completely cleans up here. Every move is forced, and king has to go back. Queen takes c4, and after king g2, knight d4, coming with queen takes d5, black has more than enough compensation for exchange, and white's king is in awful position. So this is not acceptable continuation for white, and that's why after e6 and queen f6, here white's best move is knight c3. But even after knight c3, black castles, and black easily holds equality here. E takes d, and on c3, because d4 pawn was hanging, bishop d6, black is doing just fine. Maybe even king b8 first. Well, there is no problem for black at all. Well, now let's go to more competitive option for white, which is knight takes c6. After all, knight takes c6 and bc, this pawn structure, black has to show very quickly something for this pawn structure, and it's not very easy. So let's go through this. What can white play here after bishop g2? We go queen d7, and now we have to decide for white how they continue development. What do they do? Do they go c4 and immediately after c6 pawn? Do they try to castle on a king side and hold some positional advantage and try to pressure on our weak c pawns? Let's look at them both. First, let's look at harmless continuation. Castling. Black is doing very well here after h5, g5. And a good move is rook d8. We want to put rook on d8, put pressure on d4 pawn. On the other hand, we definitely don't want to castle because our king is going to be in danger. So rook d8 is the move. Knight a3, trying to play knight c4 or possibly c4 and queen a4. After knight a3, black has to be very careful. We have to go e6, and after knight c4, knight e5 is big positional threat. We go bishop d6. And this is very playable position for black. It's not too much white can do because black wants to castle, and then, well, quiet continuations is not good enough for white. If white plays something like this, black is going to go c5, and they're going to get rid of their weakness, and then who has weaknesses? White will have g5, h3, weak king position, and black will have no negative spot in the position. And only problem they had is double pawns, they get rid of. And black is doing okay then. Now, let's look for a different option for white, then castling. Well, instead of castling, white can go c4. And here we realize that possibilities in chess are endless. And evaluation that we were taking for granted is not supposed to be done that way. So, after c4, absolutely surprising, queen e6 check. Queen e2 has to be played. Well, you don't want to go king f1 here and have your king on f1 for long time, because there is no safe place on a king side for the king. So queen e2. Besides, white wants to exchange queens. Why not? If they exchange queens, they have better pawn structure, and c6 weakness may be more visible. So after queen e2, knight b4, queen takes e6, pawn takes e6. And here we got beautiful pawn structure for black. This is very good geometrical figure, double C and double E pawns, which is absolutely unacceptable in 90% of the cases, unless you win something for it. You win nothing for it. But position is very good for black. Well, knight c2 is threatening, so knight a3 has to be played. After knight a3, black castles and white castles. Now let's see what happens if white tries to protect the d4 pawn. If white plays e3, black gets very good position after e5, d takes c, just moves the force. Knight d3 check, king e2, and now e6. So we got rid of one double pawn. We have very strong knight on d3. We are down a pawn, but white has number of problems to deal with. Rook h to d1, bishop takes a3, pawn takes a3, knight takes e5. Position is absolutely equal. There is a c4, pawn is a weak, bishop d3, potential coming, and white's pawn structure is not any better than black's. So we have here complete equality. So, well, let's see what happens after white castles. We play rook takes d4, but that looks very bad for black, because after bishop e3, if rook moves, now we have all these pawns that are absolute nightmare, and there is possibility of bishop c5, maybe rook d1, and simply going after that pawns in the long run. But this position, I strongly believe that black has an advantage, and after bishop e3 we have to go e5, and if there is a need after rook d1, we can even support it with c5. So what we're going to do, then we go e6 and develop the dark square bishop. Bishop takes d4 and ed gives black a clear advantage. Black has full-scale compensation for an exchange in a form of a pawn, central pawn, very strong central pawn, supported after e5, supported by two bishops, very powerful bishop on g6, absolutely dead knight on a3. I don't know when it's going to get into the game, and black has maybe winning advantage. Well, at least they are a lot better. So this is another position that looks absolutely awful statically, and it's so great at the same time dynamically. So that's what the beauty of extended analysis of potentially very dynamic opening.